what would you say is the most popular part of yoga, the most obvious thing that people know about when they hear the word yoga?
In the Western world, physical yoga, hatha yoga.
Exactly. They think of postures, of asanas. So in asanas are like an easy entry point because you do stuff with your body and it's easy to like manipulate your body. So why would we want to begin moving our body in very specific types of ways? What benefits would we get from that?
Well, as most of you know, there's a big push in public health to simply move, and they talk about aerobic exercise minimums and that sort of thing. If you lift weights, that's good. Yoga is not fundamentally different in that almost any kind of physical exertion is good for the body. If you're asking a somewhat more difficult question that hasn't been explored quite as much, is that are there unique ways that yoga moves the body that are uniquely relevant or optimal for certain outcomes? I think that's a harder question, but I think that certainly stretching the body and moving the body in ways, in musculoskeletal patterns that you don't normally do is good for both the body and the brain. Not unlike a pranayama, when we reverse hack the emotional autonomic system, when you move your body in ways that you don't normally move, you're providing novelty to the system. You're telling your body, I require this kind of function for my body to do. And we know that the brain, evolutionary-wise, was really designed to create movement in the body.
Yeah.
So again, when you move your body, particularly symmetrically, one of the great things about yoga is that you tend to do everything right and left. Not all sports do that, not all activities do that. So that's a genuinely unique thing about yoga. And it's important because you get balance in the brain from that.
And so the American Association of Orthopedic Surgeons put out a statement this year, I believe it was, endorsing yoga practice. And that almost like never happens for an association, a medical association, to wholeheartedly endorse one particular type of movement. But they said that yoga creates balance, flexibility, and strength, and therefore it's one of the best preventative practices that could be done, the best preventative supervised practices, and also used in certain rehabilitative conditions. So that's pretty remarkable.
It's great. Well, yoga, it takes a mat or even no mat, just you and your time and your focus. That's another advantage to yoga.
So when it comes to doing actual postures, there's a bunch of reasons that the yogi said we should be doing them. Number one is for general overall health. So when we are doing all of the different postures, the things that the yogis focused on wasn't so much the muscles and the joints and the bones and things like that. They were concerned with the physiological systems. If you read in a yoga text about how to do a posture, it'll be very simple instruction. Straighten one leg, bend your other knee, put your forehead on your leg, and that will be it. Nothing about muscles, nothing so much about joints. They'll say put your elbows in your navel and balance yourself like a stick, and that will be the end of it, and that's the Mayurasana pose. But what they're really interested in and what they discuss more at length is what are the benefits of doing that? How is it that by putting your elbows in your navel and balancing like a stick, you are increasing your digestive fire, because they know that when the digestive fire is strong, when digestion is healthy, then the rest of the system is healthy as well. In fact, I just came back from Buenos Aires yesterday from teaching a workshop, and one of the attendees is a scientist who's doing research in an Argentinian. One of the attendees is a scientist who's doing research at one of the hospitals there, and what they're investigating is how the sympathetic nerves coming from the gut are the drivers of many different types of diseases, and specifically they're looking at Alzheimer's and cancer. So all diseases, it's thought of in Ayurveda, start from the gut, start from digestion. And increasingly in modern medicine, we're seeing more research on the microbiome, on epigenetics, on how the vagal tone is also affecting digestion and things like that.
And considering it the second brain.
Exactly, exactly. So the yogis, they're concerned with physiological systems. Now, how can you affect your respiratory system or your digestive system or your nervous system just on its own by thinking about it? You can't. You have to do something. So what do? You use your body to affect a physiological system. And that's how, when we talk about in our conference making the unseen seen, that we're doing things like postures so that we can have an effect on these physiological mechanisms. Take Stacy Hunter, for example. She's going to be presenting on endothelial function and hot yoga. So what does the endothelials do?
Well, in essence, what regulates one of the big drivers of blood regulation is the ability for the arteries, which have muscles in them, the arteries to expand or contract, mostly involuntary, like unconscious autonomic nervous system. So the question is, to what degree does yoga, which will tend to stretch your body, stretch some of those or activate those, train the endothelial function to be more responsive? It's not necessarily that you want that to become conscious, but what you want is if you need a rapid flush of blood to the system, you want the body to do that instantly. Or if you need to hold back, you want the body to be responsive to environmental demand, as the scientists say. So that's really what you want. So yoga probably makes you responsive to environmental demand, not only on a pro-social level, communicative level, being in the now, it also makes your body physically more responsive on a physical level.
Yeah, and so Stacy's research has shown some very interesting things about improving endothelial function, both for hot yoga and also the same types of postures done not in a hot room.
Right. So it's not necessarily the heat.
It's not necessarily the heat. It's the yoga itself which is having this positive effect. So these are some of the ways that scientists are measuring what happens when we do the yoga postures.
Just one quick thing, Eddie was suggesting, these physical postures are driving physiological responses. So many people, particularly in the Western world, think about getting flexibility from yoga, and that does indeed happen. But flexibility in the bigger picture of health may be less important than we think of it is.
And this is coming from a physical therapist.
Yeah, I love flexibility. I do it every day. But what I'm suggesting is in the big picture of what health is, even in the physical body, flexibility may be less important than we think. Stretching, surprisingly, there's less evidence for stretching preventing injury than you would think. It's true in some ballistic sports like basketball where lots of jumping happens. For jogging, for swimming, for less ballistic sports, there's much less evidence. There's also surprisingly less evidence than you would think that stretching something actually makes it longer. A large part of what happens when you stretch something is your tolerance for stretching gets bigger, which is a weird concept, but basically you're able to tolerate and be in a position of a more elongated muscle tendon unit than before without thinking of it as being a negative experience. That in itself gives you more flexibility. That's true. There's also some truth, perhaps, that having a muscle tendon complex that is used to elongating and contracting does give you some protection against injury. But in general, there's probably less evidence than people presume about flexibility.
Okay, so why should we do postures? Why should we stretch our body? Why should we do all these different things? From a yogic perspective, the yogis were very interested in us living long, healthy lives. They said the lifespan of a given human was 100 years, and that we should do everything we could to live fully to that 100 years. And if we want to live a long life, we don't want to live a long life in a wheelchair or in a hospital bed. We want to be mobile. We want to be independent as long as possible. We want to be able to get around and do the things that we need to do in our lives, like people you see in the French countryside who are gardening at 90 years old or living in Mongolia who are 100 years old and they're still plowing the fields. And we think, this is really good. I'd like to be that active, that agile, that independent, and that having the full faculty of my mind as well in my brain when I get to be older. So the yogis did all of these things for making sure we could live a healthy, long, agile, independent, and mentally cognitive life for as long as possible.
Yeah, and certainly the physical reason. The physical yoga is a huge part of that. Yeah.
And as you start to lose strength in your body, then lifespan begins to shorten.
Right.
Even by a couple of years, if your leg strength goes down and you can't walk as much as your own, you're sitting down longer.
Your reaction time, you tend to fall, your muscle power, all those things. The average person loses 1% to 2% of their muscle mass every year after 50, unless you do something to prevent that. And if you do something to prevent it, like yoga, lifting weights, that kind of thing, you can in fact prevent this. So
lifting weights while you do yoga?
Well, if you're doing the kind of yoga you do, you are lifting weights. You're lifting your own body weight, so it definitely counts, yeah.
All right, well,
It's time to go to the lab?
I'm 1 year after 50 this year, so I better start getting. But yeah, you start early. You know, when it comes to your body, start early with all of these, all these exercise habits. You'll build up a good habit. It will be easier to exercise for longer. It's harder to pick up an exercise habit at 60 or 70.
Yeah.
You know, so start early and keep it going, and then you will keep going too.
Yeah.